In the first chapter of his book, Lazarus Come Forth, Meditations of a Christian Esotericist, Tomberg described how the 7 miracles of Jesus in the Gospel of John were presented in such a way that they are in reverse alignment with the 7 days of creation presented in Genesis. Tomberg was a Russian-born philosopher, lawyer, and Christian mystic. He is probably most well known for his book, Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism, which is an esoteric Christian work that employs the symbolism of the tarot as a framework for the exploring aspects of Christian spiritual life and growth. But here we will be discussing one of his later works, based on the resurrection of Lazarus by Jesus in the Gospel of John. Tomberg was born on February 27, 1900 in St. Petersburg, Russia. He lost both parents and his brother in the Bolshevik Revolution. In the 1920s, he was an active member of the Anthroposophical Society, becoming a prominent figure within the movement. During the 1930s, he moved away from anthroposophy due to philosophical disagreements, particularly on the interpretation of Christianity. In the mid-1940s, he moved to England, where he worked for the British Broadcasting Corporation during the Second World War. In 1948, he became a Roman Catholic, marking a significant turning point in his life. His later work leaned heavily on Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Christian mysticism. Tomberg's most significant work, Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism, was published posthumously and anonymously in 1980. It has been influential in Christian esoteric circles. He passed away on February 24, 1973 in England. The essays which make up the book Lazarus Come Forth were found in the desk drawer of the deceased Tomberg. They were first published as Lazarus Come Forth, then were recently revised into Lazarus, the Miracle of Resurrection in the World History. In the first chapter, Tomberg described how the 7 miracles of Jesus in the Gospel of John were presented in such a way that they are in reverse alignment with the 7 days of creation presented in Genesis. Because the work of Jesus was necessary to repair the damage done by the fall, the first miracle of Jesus starts where creation ended, and the 7th miracle ends where it started. I'll be discussing each miracle in more depth in future videos, but here's an overview. The first miracle in John is Jesus turning the water into wine. This corresponds with the 7th day of creation when God rested. The significance of this miracle is the restoration of our relationship with God. The second miracle is healing the official's son, which corresponds with the 6th day of creation when God created humans. The significance is the restoration from horizontal to vertical heredity. The third miracle is the healing of the paralyzed man, which corresponds with the 5th day of creation, when God created the swarms of living creatures in the sea and above the sea. The significance here is the restoration of ensouled movement in the world. The fourth miracle is the feeding of the 5,000, which corresponds with the 4th day of creation, when God created the sun, moon, and stars. The significance is the reestablishment of world and communal hierarchies. The 5th miracle was Jesus walking on water, which corresponded with the 3rd day of creation, when God separated the water from the dry land. The significance here is the independence of Christ with regard to sea and land. The 6th miracle of Jesus is the healing of the blind man. This corresponds with the 2nd day of creation, when God separated the water above from the water below. The significance was the restoration of the relationship of the above, the ideal, with the below, the real. Finally, the 7th miracle was the raising of Lazarus from the dead. This corresponded with the 1st day of creation and the creation of light, dividing the light from the darkness and the creation of night and day. The significance is the calling forth of light from darkness and the awakening of consciousness. In explaining these correspondences, Tomberg writes, "Where the creation was completed lies the starting point for the healing effect. The work of salvation takes place in reverse to that of creation, insofar as the last stage of the creation is the first work of the salvation. Genesis depicts how death arose in the world created by God, the world that was good. The Gospel of St. John portrays how death was overcome in the world that, originally created by God, now is darkened. The task set by the Gospel of St. John is to give the answer to the question, how does evolution, toil, suffering, and death turn back to the intention of the original divine creation? How does it return to the order that originally prevailed? In other words, how does toil become the way, suffering become knowledge of the truth, and death become light? That is, how was the world created through the divine word to be healed? This world, having fallen away from God, having fallen into sin, and having become subject to error, sickness, and death. The thesis of the Gospel of St. John is the following: that the same divine word which created the world in 7 acts of creation become flesh, and that the Word made flesh accomplishes the healing of this fallen, distorted world through 7 acts of healing, these being the 7 miracles of the Gospel of St. John. In my next video, we'll discuss in more depth the relationship between the first miracle of Jesus in the Gospel of John with the 7th day of creation in the book of Genesis.